We are live.
Awesome.
Hello and welcome to Lunchable GTM Ops. We're your hosts, Danielle Urban, and
Sarah Lane-Hawn.
serving up grab and go HubSpot strategy every weekday in 15 minutes or less. In today's episode, we are going to be covering sort of a broad data architecture topic, but really honing in on who owns your HubSpot and why you need to clearly define your data model to make it successful.
Yeah, so my question here is to start off with like why? Why are we talking about this? Why is this important enough to take people's time when there's a million priorities going into 2025 planning for operations? Tell me a little bit about, why deciding ownership.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of two pieces here. You've got deciding ownership, and then you've got the actual data model. And you need someone to decide the data model. So they are like inextricably linked. And defining that data model is basically deciding how HubSpot is going to map to your business. You know, in ops, we always talk about mapping like properties, and you sit there and you like draw the stupid lines and you figure out what connects to what. But this is really taking a giant step back and understanding how your business functions and the different roles of your business and how that's going to play out in HubSpot. And it's really starting from the top and moving down into like all the little things and getting into the nitty gritty properties and integrations and stuff like that. But taking that huge step back and deciding what goes in HubSpot and how is it connected is like things that people don't do.
Now, do you find that that's because most people just kind of jump in and build as they go? Or,
Yeah.
are there specific scenarios or specific industries where you find this to be more of the case, or people land themselves in a hard spot because of not having that strategic planning up front?
Yeah, I feel like I just commented this on a LinkedIn post last week. HubSpot is a victim of their own branding because when they launched and really were gaining some ground in their market, it was like 15 years ago or so. They were touting themselves as the easy to use small and medium business solution. And they stuck with that easy to use. Like we all know, it's super easy to set up a free HubSpot account and start clicking around and creating things. And you get very comfortable with that. But if you don't go into it with a strategic understanding of how the pieces connect, then it's really going to be limiting and you're going to get to a cliff where you either have to like rip and replace or bring someone in to like rebuild things and do some big migrations and move things around. So I'm curious, have you ever seen a case where someone has really been like a product manager for HubSpot? Because for me, it's pretty rare.
No, no. In fact, like majority of the time when I'm coming in with clients, it's because there wasn't an owner. So most things weren't built with intent. They either had an agency that did like a general onboarding package to get them just, set up with the basics. And then they went from there, or they had, a marketing leader who jumped in, got things kind of working. And then things kind of ran away with them over time. So a lot of the times it's coming to a place where it's not necessarily a full rip and replace, but you're pulling things very much back to the studs and
Yeah.
then building it up from there. So I've definitely had that experience. And honestly, not just in HubSpot either. Like when we're talking CRM management, right? Like I've worked with many companies who use Salesforce as their CRM, and they've had the same issue where, depending on if they had an actual operations leader who had strategically built the system or had IT owning it as just data infrastructure, right? Those were two very different ways of approaching a CRM. And one of my points of curiosity for you was, is this something that every HubSpot like using company needs to kind of take a beat, sit back down, and figure out why they're using what they're using, or is this only applicable if you're using the CRM, like full CRM functionality versus like using it as just a marketing automation platform?
No, I think everybody needs to sort of take inventory because when you mentioned operations and IT, when you have functions that have data living in other places,
Mm-hmm.
you still need to understand how your tech stack fits together. And HubSpot is one piece of that tech stack. And then you've got integration that helps move your data between places, but you need to understand what the data structure is in each of those tools to be able to map it across and understand. And that's another whole episode for us on like, what should you integrate? How should it integrate? But when you want to try and pull those pieces together and try to understand how to use HubSpot as the tool that it is, or really any tool, you need to understand what you want to get out of it. and you get out of it what you put in it. So if you're really just using the templates that you get on day one in your free version, you're going to find that you're really limited. And then when you start to upgrade, you have so many opportunities in front of you, especially as you get into custom objects and even the new object library. If you have that from the very first day that you open HubSpot, it will set you up better
Right.
than what was there 3 months ago. But it's still not going to match your business perfectly. And so having someone who is responsible for sort of project managing the implementation,
Mhm.
usually it ends up being marketing, but hopefully it's got more buy-in than that. You actually need to have that like executive sit down where you talk through like this is going to serve this function and it means we need things built in this way, and you have to do that information gathering to get all of the pieces that will build your data architecture.
Yeah, and I'll give an example too. I had a client where the CEO came to me and asked me for a very specific report, and it was a way in which they wanted to measure the ROI of their in-person events. And when they asked it in a very tactical way, right? Like, I want this report that looks like this, that has these data points, that goes over this period of time, right? It was all very tangible, tactical questions. Um, but there were, you know, limitations on what could actually be created and what could be presented. And so this led to us having a conversation of stepping back and going, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? Why do we need this? What are we going to do with the information that we get out of having an ROI analysis of your events? Are you using this to figure out where to double down and invest more? Are you using this for attribution? Are you, what are we using these numbers for? And so we got back into kind of the executive strategy of the why. And pulling back that far allowed me to be able to then guide, okay, this is then how we need to build the structure in order to produce the report that you actually need to answer the business question. And it ended up being in a very different format than what was originally asked for. And I think that's a very isolated example of what you seem to be talking about, which is that we need to know why we're doing what we're doing as an organization from an executive standpoint before we just start going and building, because it is very complex what you can do in HubSpot. And if you start building one direction, you're going to have all this stuff just kind of sitting there when you find out 6 months down the road, oh, we should have built completely different direction. Not that it was wrong, but that it wasn't foundational in a way that it could continue to be built upon. It kind of stuck out on its own limb. Am I following kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, no, I have a similar example. When you don't set that strategy at a high level, you end up with a lot of really weird band-aids that you have to undo later. And so my examples are usually around webinars. So similar to events, I've seen two cases, one where a software was doing it and one where a person was doing it. Software integrations are not all that they think that they seem. But in both cases, it was creating a property for every single webinar.
Mm.
And so it was creating, one of my clients did a webinar a month. Usually that's the cadence for software these days, at least smaller companies. Um, so you're creating 12 properties per year and marking them either attended or yes, no, like whatever it is that you're
Yeah.
doing. But then to actually use that long term, sure, it's got some major benefits. It's like super easy to access that in reports and filter on those reports. Like, did someone come to this webinar? Great. What happened with that group? It makes it very easy to do that. But when you have like 36 properties and you're trying to figure out, did someone attend a webinar ever? You now have to check off 36 different properties in
Right.
that list that you're building. And those are things that you might not think about ahead of time. But when there's a structure and an understanding on how pieces fit together, then you're giving everyone a blueprint to follow for whatever they're building. And so you don't end up with like weird hacky workarounds or like inconsistent naming conventions that make it difficult to use things. So setting that standard from the executive level and gaining an understanding of what each data object is going to do and how it's going to function in your business really just sets the groundwork to grow into your CRM with however much you need to grow. And you
Mm.
might need to adjust as you go. Like I mentioned, if you grow into an enterprise hub and have custom objects down the road, you'll sort of see that opportunity present itself. and then your migration isn't that difficult. So I was just talking to someone in higher education where they have HubSpot as their CRM to manage any prospective students or prospective campers for their summer
Mhm.
camp. And then they have different platforms that actually handle the registration for that. But since they're doing their nurturing and their marketing, they need to make sure that they pull people out of that as soon as a registration happens or they hit whatever goal. And so they were trying to figure out how to do that integration. But I was saying, if you get to the point where you want to add an enterprise hub, it would make a lot of sense to create an enterprise or a registration object.
Right.
And so you start to see those things come through naturally once you understand how the pieces fit together. And then like, no, we're not going to create a registration property because we want people to come back year after year. But without understanding how that all comes together and what the basis is and how those pieces need to function, you're just going to create some weird workarounds.
So let me ask you this, because I get this question a lot from especially smaller businesses, in that they get in this point where they decide that they're going to double down and use HubSpot, and they're trying to figure out structure, but they're also trying to figure out how to resource um, who to come in and manage this. And a lot of times, what I'll hear is, okay, we're trying to figure out if we need somebody who's a HubSpot expert who has X insight, whether it's industry or marketing or sales, like, do we focus on HubSpot and have that as the expertise and have these other skill sets as secondary, or do I go find a great marketer who's tech savvy and like has some HubSpot experience, and they're trying to figure out how to balance those things? Like, how do you answer that? How do you advise
I
people?
mean, it's the same answer we always give as consultants. It depends. But I think the fractional market, as we know, is incredibly robust right now. And so I'm finding with some of my clients, I like to say the best consultant is the one that can fire themselves. Like,
Mm,
you want to get out. So we want to, in the best way possible, you want to build a sustainable system. And so you may need some help through that transition and deciding what that structure looks like. And having an outside person who can bug your executives without, their butt on the line can be really helpful sometimes. Um, but it depends sort of where your business is targeting growth. If the growth is through like deep attribution and some complicated ABM tactics, and you need that technical aspect to really succeed, then yeah, go find a HubSpot expert. We can make lots of referrals for people who will get into the nitty gritty and do some like weird technical monkeying to get you to the point that you need to. If you are investing in marketing for the first time and you're hiring your first demand gen and you're looking to grow and scale, then go for the demand gen person, go for the campaign and branding people that are going to build out that team, and then just fill in where you need with the fractional strategist who's going to help you set the structure and then train your internal team to maintain it.
yeah.
And then you can always come back with questions, but you need someone who's understanding that whether you hire that person or you outsource that function will really just depend on the stage of growth in your business. I think when you hit that critical point where you're starting to think about rev ops and life cycle marketing and full funnel selling,
Hmm.
then you probably should have an ops person, whether they're sales and marketing ops or
Yeah.
sales versus marketing ops. You've got two different people, or even someone who just owns rev ops. You can get really specific based on the maturity and the budget that you have available.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. Now, going into 2025, if people have the question of, all right, how do I know if we're in the right place, right? Like, you're telling me this is important. You're telling me that we need to know what our data architecture plan is, and that we have it resourced appropriately. Like, are there red flags that'll help you know if you're going the wrong direction and that you need to pause? Are there green flags that tell us, like, hey, we're doing great, keep going? Like, what do we do to find out if this is something that we need to reassess?
It's such a good question because that's kind of like the maturity assessment that we keep talking about and need to get down on paper sometime. But having if you have 36 webinar properties, you should really reassess.
Yeah.
If you're creating a new property for every webinar, let's have a conversation. But I think when you look ahead, some of the things that you'll notice most immediately is, do you have to add a whole lot of filters to your report to get to what should be a simple answer?
Mm.
Do you know what defines someone as a customer? If not, which I know a lot of businesses don't actually have that dialed in, then it's probably a red flag that you need to take a step back and understand how the pieces fit together. If you are doing some complicated copying over workflows to get that attribution across, sometimes that is the solution, but sometimes it can be a red flag that you need to take a better look at how the pieces fit together. Have you seen anything that's like immediately a red flag you need to jump in and change something?
Conversion rates. If I ask somebody, hey, what's your through rate from marketing to sales pipeline? What's your conversion from MQLs to opportunities actually open? And it's just blank stare. It's not usually that they don't care, it's that they have no idea where that data is and how it sits. And there's usually like 3 or 4 layers then that you need to unpack to be able to get that to be functional. That's a really big one for me. And then anything that's manual, whether that's people having to ask questions over and over again, sales reps having to go to marketing and be like, hey, was this because of the webinar? Did this person reach out because of that event we went to? Anytime there's a lot of questions or a lot of repeat manual tasks, that's the other place, right? Like if you do data modeling correctly, things should be very efficient, very effective, not need a lot of back and forth communication because it should already be in there and being serviced in a way that people can act on. So I think those are some other kind of quick, like, hey, there's probably some stuff here. And I think it's important to note that whatever that little red flag is that makes you go like, ugh, I don't like this doesn't feel right, there's going to be 3 or 4 layers that have to be unearthed underneath that. But then there's 10 other things that are made better, not just the one thing that you were aware of. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I know we're at our 15 minutes. Any last like steps that people should take or things that they should be considering when it's about their data model and their ownership for how they plan their HubSpot for 2025?
HubSpot has a really great data model view. That can be a good starting point to understand how things connect together. You already have access to it, it's in your settings. So you can go take a look at that and start to piece together at a high level how it all fits together. I usually find that a quick audit of your sort of cycles for life cycle stages, deal stages, and all that, and how it fits together can also be a good auditing tool internally or externally. So I think that's a great stopping point, though. I'm so excited to continue this series, and we'll see everyone tomorrow to talk about invisible settings that maybe you missed when you were setting up your HubSpot.
Sounds good. Cheers.
Stopping. All right. Lord only knows if that went live.
Here, let me.
It was a good recording.